In the waning chill of early spring, when the thawed earth of Lancaster County bled mud through the hoofs of plow horses and the sun cast long golden fingers across black hats and bonnets, something arrived that did not belong. The roads were quiet, the fields readying for planting, but on a windless Thursday morning, a buggy unlike any other creaked its way over the ridge and descended into the valley of the Amish, drawn by a massive black horse with eyes like polished coal and no brand upon its flank. The buggy was heavy, matte black, and bore no insignia, no ornament, no family crest. The horse pulled it without whip or word. No driver sat visibly atop the front seat, only the silhouette of a man inside, still as a stone, framed in a warped windowpane that reflected too much and nothing at once. That same day, the children of 3 neighboring farms stopped playing without cause. One girl, Miriam Lapp, only 6 years old, looked up at her mother and said, "He's almost here," though no one knew what she meant until evening came and the stranger stepped from his buggy in silence outside the Frolic barn, the one left unused since old Jacob Frolic passed in the winter. He wore the garb of the plain people, black coat, black pants, a hat with a brim wide enough to shade both shoulders, but his coat bore 12 buttons down the front and none of them matched, and his boots gleamed like oiled stone, and his gloves were black leather, tightly fitted, though the spring air was already warm. He asked no one for directions, gave no name, did not stop by the bishop's house as visitors were expected to do, and instead handed old Martha Fisher 3 silver coins and said only, "I'll need the barn for a fortnight." He did not ask. He did not bargain. And Martha, shaken by a chill she could not name, accepted the coins though her fingers trembled. She told her son that night Ed never seen eyes like his, not even eyes, really, but wells, bottomless and ancient and devoid of color. From that day on, nothing in the valley moved quite the same. The chickens in Ruth Yoder's coop began to lay bloodied eggs or none at all. A stillborn calf was born with 2 tongues and a third eye sealed shut in its forehead. Milk curdled in the pail before it could be brought to the house. Lanterns flickered blue and popped with static when the stranger passed, even in daylight. And the youngest children, those not yet taught to doubt their second sight, began to draw with sticks in the dirt, silent little sketches of a tall, faceless man with white hands and no mouth. They said he watched from the trees. They said he whispered without sound. When pressed, they would not answer. They would only wipe the drawings away quickly, as though afraid of being seen. Among the elders, confusion wrestled with custom. Was he English? Mennonite, perhaps? A man between orders? A fallen bishop from another settlement? But no letters had arrived. No kin had come to claim him. And no one knew his name. He ate alone. He walked alone. He never attended worship. When the bell tolled on Sunday, he did not come. Not even once. This was noted but not confronted, not in the open. The Ordnung, the sacred code of the Amish, had no passage for what he was. Only young Eli Zook, a bright-eyed carpenter's apprentice with more boldness than sense, dared speak directly to the man. He met him outside the dry goods store, where the stranger stood unmoving beside a shelf of flour sacks. "Where are you from?" Eli asked, smiling politely but standing firm. The man turned slowly, too slowly, and regarded Eli with eyes that did not blink. His voice was soft, but it spread through the air like black smoke. "From the place you'll go if you break your vows," he said, then walked away without purchasing anything. That night, Eli's workshop, a freshly built structure with hand-planed walls and a loft of cedar, caught fire so quickly that the beams collapsed before the horses could be unhitched. No injuries. But nothing survived. The townsfolk said it was the wind. Dry wood. An accident. But no one believed it. They only whispered. The next night, Bishop Reuben Hostetler called a gathering. He was a tall man, firm in his words, a leader who carried the memory of 40 harvests and 20 funerals. But that evening, his voice bore a quiver that had never been heard before. "We are a people of peace," he began. "But peace cannot grow where fear festers. If there is evil among us, it must be named." The circle nodded, murmured prayers, agreed in principle. But none dared say the man's name, because none knew it. And when a small group rode out at dawn to confront him, to ask who he was and why he'd come, they found the barn door swinging in the wind, though the air was still. Inside, the hay had been swept into a perfect circle. A crude wooden cross had been carved into the floor, upside down, its grooves stained black. There were no possessions, no bedroll, no food. No signs of life or departure. Only a single feather, impossibly large, jet black and too warm to the touch, resting atop the center beam. The bishop ordered the barn shuttered. No one disobeyed. But that same week, strange dreams overtook the valley. Men dreamt of drowning in fields that turned to black water. Women dreamt of infants with empty eyes and whispers that turned milk bitter. Children began waking with blood at their noses, screaming names they'd never been taught, names like Lamech, Asriel, and Cuthiel. Then, 3 days after the barn was found empty, 13-year-old Jonas Beeler vanished. His boots were found by the creek. His hat had been nailed to a tree, upside down. A week later, Sarah King disappeared from her family's buggy during a thunderstorm so sudden it seemed torn from another country. The buggy never stopped moving. Her father had turned to hand her a shawl, and she was simply gone. Oh scream! No mark. Her bonnet was found hours later in the branches of a tree too tall for any child to climb. And so, the disappearances began, not always of people, sometimes of time itself. A full hour would vanish from the memory of a mother churning butter. A horse would walk a mile it could not have traveled without opening its gate. One family, the Stoltzfusses, woke to find their home turned backwards, the front door facing north instead of east, and none of them remembered moving. The elders said nothing. The bishop said little. But their eyes grew hollower each day. Preachers gave sermons twice as long but spoke in circles, sweat dripping down their collars. Old women prayed louder. Young men began sleeping with knives beneath their pillows. And still, the children drew the stranger, always without a face, always in the same black coat. Then came the thunder with no storm, a shaking that knocked tools from hooks and sent lamps to the floor. One night, the entire Yoder family woke to find themselves standing barefoot in the field behind their house, all 7 of them, hands clasped, faces turned toward the woods. They had no memory of how they got there. And deep in those woods, someone, or something, had been carving again. A message was found on the side of a birch tree, etched deep, "The vows are broken. The hour is late." When Bishop Hostetler read it, he did not sleep for 3 nights. Then, one morning, he vanished too. His boots remained beneath his bed. His Bible was open to the book of Job. His window had been locked from the inside. No signs of struggle. Only a black glove on the pillow. And then, the children stopped drawing point 2 weeks after the stranger vanished into silence. The township woke to a new fear that had no shape, no face, only the echo of 3 young boys gone missing overnight. Their names were Aaron Lapp, Jacob Byler, and Caleb Miller, all apprentices at the smithy, their tools still warm on the anvil, their lunch sacks unopened on the bench, and their bonnets hung neatly on the wall as if they had never intended to leave at all. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, no tracks to follow, only a rooster crowing at midnight, a sound so unnatural that entire households jolted awake thinking the sun had risen, and in that hour, several parents claimed to have heard footsteps on their roofs, not birds or branches or wind, but booted feet pacing deliberately, slowly, above their bedrooms, pausing as if listening for something within, and amid the confusion, grief, and whispered suspicion. It was Mary Yoder, midwife, widow, and silent keeper of many unspoken things, who began to weep alone in her home, not for the boys, but for something she had hidden and now feared had grown teeth of its own, something she should never have touched, let alone kept, a book bound in dry black leather that smelled of burnt wood and winter graveyards, a book she found beneath the straw in her birthing room on the night she delivered a child in secret, a child born to Anna Troyer, a girl from bird-in-hand who had come by night, barefoot, with eyes wide like a deer's and hands that trembled too much to hold a lantern, saying only, "He said I would not bleed if I did not look," over and over, refusing to speak the stranger's name or describe his face, but insisting he came through the wall, and when the child was born it did not cry. It only opened its mouth and hissed like steam escaping from a kettle, and when Mary raised it to the light, she saw its skin had a sheen like polished ash, and most disturbing of all, it cast no shadow, not on the bed, not on the wall, not even when Mary turned the lantern toward it. Frightened beyond reason, Mary swaddled the infant, handed it to Anna, who wrapped it in her shawl and walked out into the cold with no destination, and Mary never saw her again, but what remained was the book, lying where the infant had been, damp and humming faintly like a beehive beneath ice, terrified but compelled. Mary had wrapped it in cloth, took it home, and buried it under the floorboards of her pantry, thinking she had hidden away evil like one might bury a dead cat beneath a tree and forget it was ever there. But the evil did not sleep. Within days of her burying the book, a wind began to press against the walls of her house, not with howling but with rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on glass, and the rain came not from clouds but from clear skies, falling straight down in heavy sheets that soaked only the homes closest to where the book had been kept, and each strange storm, each burnt tree, each failing birth seemed to spiral outward from the pantry beneath which that leathered tome rested, pulsing with a quiet defiance to the ordnung, and Mary, at first in denial, soon realized a pattern had formed. A lightning bolt shattered the very barn where the missing boys had last worked, flames engulfed the cottage of Hiram Lance, who had mocked the stranger's button coat on the day he arrived. 2 wells went dry within hours of a traveling preacher declaring the bishop unfit to lead, and always, in her dreams, Mary saw the book floating in black water, open to pages she could not read, pages filled with looping, spidery text that resembled Low German but stung her eyes when she looked too long, as if the letters were crawling across her thoughts. One night, unable to bear the humming any longer, Mary unearthed the book by candlelight and laid it open on her kitchen table, the leather cracked as it unfolded, and the pages turned by themselves, as if recalling a memory or uncoiling a map, and on one page she saw a crude drawing of a creature with the body of a man but legs like a deer's and a mouth on its chest. On another, a child crucified upside down with nails in its eyes, and a caption beneath that read, "Rocker," the German word for return, circled in ink so dark it looked like dried blood, and there was a map as well, not of Pennsylvania, but of some place deeper, stranger. A place shaped like a spiral with symbols instead of roads and little red X's drawn over names she had never heard: Ebenholz, Grafensee, Totenfeld, none of them real, none of them of this world, and when she tried to burn the book, striking flint beneath it until sparks danced across the floor, the pages refused to catch, the flames slithered backward like frightened snakes, and the air filled with the scent of sulfur and raw meat. In horror, Mary slammed the book shut and ran barefoot to the bishop's house in the dead of night, the candle still clutched in one hand, her bonnet askew, her dress muddied from her knees down, and when she arrived, banging on the door until her knuckles bled, it was not Bishop Hostetler who answered, but his wife, who said only, "He's not right anymore." And Mary saw this truth for herself when the bishop emerged, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken, lips moving in silent prayer even as he looked at her, and when she begged him to intervene, to see the book for himself, he only chuckled, a dry sound like wind through corn husks, and muttered, "You think he left? He was born here." He just waited, before retreating back into the house and closing the door. Mary, now trembling with fear that had no name, returned to her home and placed the book in the stove again. this time smashing it with iron tongs, but still it would not break, it merely hissed and shivered, the pages fluttering angrily, and from that night on, her dreams became impossible to endure. She saw fields of wheat bending towards something invisible, all the stalks leaning east. She saw infants walking backward into rivers. She saw the stranger without his hat, revealing a scalp covered in eyes that blinked independently, each of them staring straight into her heart, and she heard a name in the wind, not her own, but something she'd buried long ago, something tied to her childhood. And her brother disappeared one foggy afternoon and her father forbade her to ever speak of it. It was all connected now, she could see that, tied through blood, silence, and ink, and so, in the final hours of her life, Mary did what the Ordnung never taught. She wrote a letter, addressed not to the elders or to any bishop, but to whoever would find her, a warning scratched in trembling lines that read, "The book is not a thing, it is a gate. Do not open it again. Bury it deep. Pray it does not remember your name." And with that, she lit every candle in her house, laid the book in the center of her table once more, and waited. She did not sleep, she did not eat, she only waited, and when morning came, and the sun rose, and the neighbors passed her cottage on the way to market, they found the front door wide open, the table bare, every candle burned to the wick, and Mary Yoder gone without trace, no signs of struggle, no broken furniture, only a circle of melted wax on the table, perfectly round, with a single feather resting in the middle, black, too large for any bird in Lancaster, and still warm to the touch. By the end of that long, dry summer in 1856, the soil itself seemed to have grown weary of holding life, and even the most steadfast among the Amish of Lancaster County could no longer call what hovered over their homes mere superstition or storms or stress, because the land had changed in ways that language refused to hold. The cornfields leaned in directions that defied wind, the wells no longer echoed when pebbles were dropped in, and the birds, once so constant in song, had taken to gathering on rooftops at dusk in silent flocks, as if waiting for something that had not yet fully returned but had already begun to press its weight against the fabric of the Ordnung. The changes in the people came quietly at first, in subtle frictions and fractures that the elders would have called tests of faith. Had their own eyes not grown dim with sleeplessness, young men began trimming their beards before marriage, some even shaving them off entirely as if trying to deny their covenant with age and structure, while young women were caught sewing red sashes into the hems of their aprons, little flashes of color not meant for beauty but for defiance, or perhaps recognition, as if marking themselves for something that walked the shadows between barns and loomed behind the still windows of night. And though none dared speak it openly, many knew in their hearts that what had once been whispered as nonsense had now become flesh and pattern and presence. Someone, or something, had unsettled the very rhythm of their world, and whatever it was had not left, only hidden itself better. The woods, once a place for quiet walks and gathering berries, now murmured in languages no man could trace, and on 3 separate nights, the distant notes of a violin were heard playing from within the trees, not joyful polkas or folk songs, but long, dragging chords, low and mournful, like the sound of mourning pressed into a bowstring, and those who heard it swore that their milk turned sour by morning and that their children would not wake until well after noon, even when the sun flooded their faces. In desperation, or perhaps in stubborn denial, the elders called for a communal act, a barn raising, something old, something sacred, something binding, not just of wood and nails but of hands and prayer and sweat. The idea was simple and absurdly hopeful: to reset the rhythm, to rebuild what had been broken without naming what had broken it, to bring the people back into step with the Ordnung by doing the one thing that required unity of body and spirit. A barn, raised by many hands in one day, built as offering to God and as defiance to the thing they feared to name. Every family was ordered to attend, not by threat but by implication. No excuses would be honored, no absences ignored, and so they came, arriving in the soft orange light of dawn with their tools, their baked goods, their blankets, their children, and their silence. The site had been chosen deliberately, a wide field near the Trilene, far from the cursed frolic barn and the strange winds of the Yoder homestead. And though the grass grew too tall and the soil resisted every stake, the beams were laid out by noon, and the songs began, low at first, tentative, then rising in rhythm as shoulders heaved and pulleys turned and hammers sang. A kind of blunt hymn against the dark, harmony of wood and grit and human defiance. For several hours, it worked, the fear receded, laughter returned in brief waves, and even the children played again without watching the woods, and yet no one could ignore the sky, which though clear, bore a light that seemed too sharp, too metallic, as if the sun had been hammered thin like a coin and no longer gave warmth, only reflection. And then, just as the last beam was raised above the central truss, a silence swept the field, not the usual hush of exhaustion or awe, but a vacuum, as though the air had been pulled away by unseen lips, and every person, from child to elder, turned slowly toward the edge of the cornfield where a figure stood, motionless, tall, dark, more silhouette than man, though the outline of his coat and hat were unmistakable, and his stillness was so complete it seemed to warp the wind around him. No one spoke, no one moved, and yet all felt the same thing, that he had been there long before the barn raising began, and that the building itself had summoned him. For a moment, he did nothing, said nothing, only watched, and in that pause, the sun dimmed without clouds, as if turning its face away, and a hot wind rose from nowhere, bringing with it the scent of rust and dead flowers. Then, with no warning, one of the oxen used to haul timber fell dead, not by wound or poison or exhaustion, but as if its life had been plucked like a thread. Its legs buckled, its eyes rolled white, and its body hit the earth with a finality that echoed. Panic rippled through the crowd, women clutching children, men tightening grips on hammers and ropes, but no one approached the figure, no one except old Jacob Schrock, the eldest among them, a man who had buried more years than most had lived and who now, with fire in his joints and truth in his bones, walked slowly toward the cornfield, past the frightened circle, until he stood 20 paces from the figure and shouted a name none had ever heard before, a name that cracked across the field like a curse spoken for the first time in generations, Lamech. And though the name meant nothing to the others, the moment Jacob spoke it, the figure smiled, not with lips but with presence, a grin that stretched through the air like a blade, and Jacob, brave Jacob, clutched his chest and fell to the ground before his knees could bend, dead without sound or struggle, his eyes wide and unseeing. Then came the screaming, not from one voice but from many, a wave of terror that shattered the order like dry wood, and the barn was abandoned mid-frame, tools dropped, food scattered, ropes left swinging as families fled in all directions, some toward their buggies, others simply into the trees, not all of them returning. That night, 20 families packed their lives into wagons and left Lancaster without waiting for dawn. Some went west, toward Ohio, others north to Canada, their homes left empty, their names never spoken again by those who remained. Those who stayed never spoke of what they saw, never again mentioned the barn or the figure or the name, and in time the field where the half-built barn stood was swallowed by weeds and vines and time, the frame collapsing slowly into earth until nothing remained but warped nails and a single crossbeam that still weeps sap every midsummer. No Amish plow touches that land, no map dares name it, and children are told never to play near it. Thug. They sometimes do, and those who whisper too loudly near its edge have claimed, only once, only in hushed confession, that when they say the word rocker, something stirs in the corn, something tall and watching, something that waits not for prayer or peace but for invitation. And late at night, when the roads are quiet and the fog rolls low, a buggy can sometimes be heard traveling that road, its wheels too smooth, its horse never seen, and always, the sound fades into laughter, the kind of laughter that does not come from joy but from memory, from patience, from something very old that remembers every name it's ever heard and waits for someone to forget what was buried.